Miami, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Haudenosaunee Confederacy, whose lands we stand on, and the nearly 28,000 Native American people who live in Northeast Ohio today, your neighbors, coworkers, classmates, and community members who represent over 100 tribal nations. I would like to welcome everyone to our session today on behalf of the Stanford Racial Justice Initiative Sustainability Committee and the Common Reading Program at Tri-C. Welcome to today's panel discussion about advocacy and intersectionalities. Today's conversation will give us a chance to learn from our speakers' varied experiences as advocates and how their intersectionalities have influenced their involvement. The panel will address some previously submitted questions from faculty, staff, and students for the first hour or so, and then we will provide time for any additional questions you might have. If you think of them, feel free to put them in the chat as we're going, and then we'll address them at the end. But I know how I am sometimes. I have to get it out. So if it's in the chat, we're good and we'll come back to it. I'm excited to hand today's event over to Juice McKenna, a soon-to-be graduating student in the Conflict Resolution and Peace Studies program. She will introduce our panelists and moderate the session today. So again, welcome everybody.
Hey everybody, I'm Juice. Thank you so much, Casey, for introducing me. And I'm so excited to be here with everybody, especially the panelists. I'm a little bit nervous, so if I start to overtalk, that's my default. Somebody just raised their hand up, like, Juice, come on, you're overtalking. Okay, so I'm going to introduce everybody, read some bios. So Michelle Davis is a professor here at Tri-C. She's born and raised in Ohio. She's a mother to a 20-year-old son and many furry quadrupeds. She holds a degree in interdisciplinary anthropology and a master's of science in geographical information sciences with a focus on geoarchaeology. In addition to teaching, Michelle has worked on archaeological projects in the Great Basin, Eastern India, and here in Northeast Ohio. In partnership with other scientists, she has also served as geospatial analyst for the USDA and our local food bank in order to identify and close the gaps in food insecurity. Additionally, she was a research fellow for forest inventory research at Sequoia National Park for the National Park Service. Michelle loves traveling and has a vested interest in research at Lake Manicouagan, Quebec, studying permafrost freeze and thaw cycles, as well as endangered flowers and bathymetry of the lake. She helps manage community gardens and is involved with the urban agriculture scene and activities in Akron. Prof. Davis claims she is an adamantly part of a hashtag Food Not Lawns culture and can feed her family in 1/4 of an acre of land. So welcome, Michelle. And then I'll move on to Jen Deerinwater. Jen is a bisexual two-spirit, multiply disabled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and an award-winning journalist and organizer who covers a myriad of issues her communities face with an intersectional lens. Jen is the founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism and a 2019 New Economies Reporting Project and a 2020 Disability Futures Fellow. Jen received a BA from the University of Southern California in Gender Studies and Political Science with an emphasis on American federal government, a graduate certificate in Women in Politics and Public Policy from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and an MS in Communications Management from Simmons College. Jen is a contributor to Truth Out, and her work has been featured in a wide range of publications, including Bitch, Awesome, Rewire News, and New Now Next. Jen's writing is best known on campus because of its inclusion in Alice Wong's anthology, Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century. Jen has additional works in Two Spirits Belong Here, the forthcoming Crip authorship, and Building Narrative Power for 21st Century Social Movements. She's a co-editor of the anthology Sacred and Subversive and is currently hard at work on her own book soon to be announced. Jen has been interviewed for numerous outlets on her work, and The Advocate named Jen a 2019 Champion of Pride. While a nomad at heart and raised in rural areas of her nation's reservation, in Oklahoma and rural Texas, Jen currently lives on occupied Piscataway land known as Washington, D.C. And Kima Durden III from Riddle. Kima Durden is an environmental educator who has led programs and activities both nationally and internationally. He is currently involved in projects in Ghana, Kenya, Belize, and Israel. These projects include fresh well water initiatives in conjunction with the African Hebrew Development Agency and regenerative agriculture and healthy lifestyles programs. In Israel, he assisted in the planning of an international sustainability summit and volunteered at the Dimona Community Agricultural Kibbutz project. Kima is trained in avionic mechanical engineering, construction, and is a graduate of Cuyahoga Community College's postgraduate program of environmental health and safety, specializing in public relations, urban agriculture, and community engagement activities. In 2011, he assisted in the implementation of a stormwater management program for one of Cleveland's local townships. His goal is to transform communities by creating access to holistic, nutritional food for the spiritual and nutritional development of peoples and families throughout the world. That's awesome, Kima. Nice to meet you. So I wanted to open up the session here with a general question. And this, I think popcorn style is good, so whoever wants to answer can. So I think advocacy looks really different for a lot of people. So I'm curious as to what does advocacy look like for each of you, and who and what inspires you and motivates you to do the work?
Jen, would you mind going first? Oh,
Sorry, I apologize. Before I answer that question while it's on my mind, this is what I was looking for. I wanted to mention that there's a book coming out in 2 days on April 15th that's free. It's a free ebook being put out by Verso Books. It's V like Victor, ERS like Sam, O, books.com. And it's called Property Will Cost Us the Earth, Direct Action in the Future of the Global Climate Movement. I'll have a piece in it, but I'm really excited about this book since it's free, and Verso, just for the future, also puts out free ebooks fairly regularly. So yeah, I hope you all take a look at that. And I'm also really excited to be here. I went to a community college before I transferred on to USC, and so I really love community colleges. I'm really excited to talk with you all today. So advocacy. I think I'll just try to keep it short and say for me, I think what keeps me motivated right now, when I'll be honest, I'm not feeling the most hopeful, is one, thinking about youth and the mess that they have inherited and how we have to fight for them, but also thinking about the ancestors that came before me and how they fought for me and all of us to come. I'll leave it at that one for that question.
I'll jump in from Riddle. Again, to echo the words of our previous speaker, I'm honored to be here, be a part of this forum. I think it's very important. When I think about advocacy, I think about the root to advocate. It means to stand up for or speak on behalf of someone, primarily first yourself, right? And then others that may have concerns or issues in a particular space or community. In this case, particularly around environmental issues for Riddle. And I think the biggest thing for us has been, as we communicate with community stakeholders, kind of finding out what each person's passion is, where do they see the weak spots in the water balloon, if you will, and how do we kind of work together to mend that so that we all can survive. And so we just think of advocacy in the space of being a voice for maybe some folks that don't have a voice or that can't reach a broader audience. And we'd like to use our forum as a format to do that. And our sweet spot is around health and wellness, nutrition, education, farming, gardening, and those things work for us very well.
Thank you for that. Michelle?
Yes, thank you both. Advocacy, really for me, it means time, like time spent. We get so stretched nowadays that my motivation is to spend time with all of these things that we've mentioned, advocating for those who don't have a voice. And that includes like the forest down the road, trying to connect people. We're so disconnected. You know, I feel like during COVID, it's been such a strange phenomenon that we were totally disconnected physically. That hurt a lot of people. Like was really hard to come out of that. So advocating for those who are having a hard time connecting, I guess, and understanding too. And that takes time. Yes, that's in a nutshell. Heart and time is advocacy.
Yeah, and Michelle, you mentioned connection, and I think another question I have is, how do you get people to care about issues?
The best way to get folks to understand or care or think about it more is to make sure that you can identify places in their life where it would be where it can happen. Like we can really relate it in some cases. So at the beginning of the semester, what I want to do is get a grant for like a couple hundred reusable water bottles, give them to students, ask students to basically fill it up all semester long and then calculate what amount of plastic you saved at the end of that semester, and then multiply that by, a couple of classes to see that there is an impact. Do we need, where is there a need for the good to be done? Where's the need? And how, your mother, your partner, your children, your animals are all connected to the quality of food and the access of food that we have. So really making it personal, not too personal enough to where it might, it's not outside of comfort zone, but it's part of everyday behavior. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Very well said. I'll jump in on that if I could. So the way we frame it at Riddle is we typically think about it in the framework of when you go visit your doctor. And the first thing your doctor asks is, where does it hurt, right? And we try to approach advocacy in that way so that when we embrace our community, we want to ask, where does it hurt? So we know where to respond. Because too often the assumption is from professionals and even folks, the area we particularly service is the inner city, low income areas. And typically, oftentimes funders and folks with resources assume what a particular neighborhood needs and brings in fixes and infrastructure and ideas and businesses that they think would work in a particular neighborhood, but hadn't taken the time to really query the neighborhood, to ask the neighborhood what they want and what they need and what they would like to see their community look like. So many of those projects, though well-intended, often fail because we don't do the homework on the front end to ask the community what they need and where does it hurt. So we believe that we should be invited into communities and not assume what a community needs, that we should ask where does it hurt and not assume that we know where it hurts because of what we saw on TV or social media or in the news. Now we know. No, we want to go really grassroots and ask folks that are having issues. What are your issues? How can we help? And if we can't help, what resources can we bring to the table? Because we don't have all of the answers. We have some, but we can point you in the direction of someone that does. So we approach it from that angle, you know, by asking community members, where does it hurt? So we can look at how we can help in that space.
This is Jen speaking. So I want to mirror what's been said already, especially around ask the community what they need. I'll say specifically as a tribal citizen and as a disabled person. Native people and disabled people, we've always got people outside our communities coming in thinking they know what we need and what's best for us without actually talking to us. So ask people what they need, meet them where they're at, and help them with what they need, and be a support. Don't go in to take over and be the, you know, quote, expert, because everyone is an expert on their own lives, you know. The other thing I would say, though, is in that process, I think sometimes, like when I start conversations with people, you know, and I try to talk, like, for example, how the climate crisis is also a healthcare and a disability crisis, and trying to explain why that's important to people. Like I'll try to find a local issue, of which I know y'all out in Ohio you have no shortage of environmental fights out there right now. But you know, for like me in DC, something I might pull is, oh, do you realize that the vast majority of days in DC, we only have moderate air quality? And we actually have a very high likelihood that that's going to get worse for us in the future. And like, let's talk about which communities in particular in DC are most impacted. You know, it's the lower income neighborhoods for the most part. So yeah, what's already been said here, and then just finding something that's local to that community, that's an issue that they might be experiencing, and then trying to tie it around to maybe the bigger good for folks at times when it's appropriate.
Jen, I thought you made a good point when you said this idea of making information available, because sometimes community members, they just don't know what hurts, right? They don't know that there's a, you know, a life disparity between, you know, Cleveland proper and some of the outer ring suburbs that's only 5 minutes away, and there's a 20-year life, you know, disparity. So people just don't know. And if we could be a conduit, at least to start the conversation, right? And that's the beginning, I think, of advocacy, is to make people aware. Great point.
Yeah, that's education is a big component of it. It's amazing how much I've just learned in the last few years doing the work that I do. You know, before I came to journalism, I worked in politics and did campaign work. And so, you know, I've always been politically minded and aware of things that were going on. But once you really start digging in and you start reading reports and you start analyzing data and you start looking at who funds campaigns, and once you start doing that, there's a lot of information to convey, and the average person is never going to be able to dig in and do that work. So yeah, passing along information is a big part of it, but I think also empowering people on how to take that action is the next also really big step.
Agreed.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. I'm working on my service learning project this semester for the conflict studies program. And one thing I'm trying to do is bring awareness around resources at our college, and not just awareness, but how students can actually have access. And that's a question I have for you all. How do you get that information out? How do you make it accessible for people? How do people get it in their hands?
Can I answer that for what I've seen? I'm firstly so absolutely proud, and my heart just swells with happiness that we're having a food pantry here at Western Campus. I'm so happy about that. You know, they've connected with farmers for free produce last semester before COVID. I don't remember, like 1 day a week, free vegetables, just come pick up potatoes and carrots. I'm so like proud of, not proud. It just makes me really happy. If it's a need for a lot of people and a lot of our students. But as far as delivering messages to people, getting, like, the conduits need to be all of us here to each other. And sometimes there are conduits that you didn't even see coming. Like, my students can be conduits for me as well. So looking at all the directions and taking the good care and wanting to take care of the community. I'm sorry, I got kind of off topic. But being really good with social media helps too. Really good. And getting into the community, like passing out papers or being at the farmer's market, like with a recipe book in your hand with the exact vegetables that are at that stand. Pick up these and here's what you can make. I think that's very important. Something like that.
Agreed. Agreed.
This is Jen. Is it okay if I go next? Yeah. So I think for me, in terms of delivering messages, I mean, it's kind of obvious as a journalist how I do that. But I think that, media and digital, our digital communications is going to be just going to continue to become more and more crucial on how we share information, how we share the things that we're talking about right now, whether that's through, and I don't think that's necessarily going to always be through like an official news source. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't trust the vast majority of our news sources in this country. But a lot of what I keep up with is following grassroots groups, hearing what they're doing, following their Instagrams or their Twitters. I stay up to date on a lot of things like that. And that's a lot of times, I'll be honest, that's how I have found my news stories in the past that I've covered. It's how I have gotten connected with people to interview. And then in the process of that, like I do unpaid community organizing work. And in that, getting connected with people in those ways, I've also, gone out and done things to pitch in, help out. I've, moved some resources their way or wrote press releases. So I think media is like a big component of that. But I'll also say you can't have that education, you can't have that information if you don't have internet, if you don't have digital access. And we cannot forget that we have a lot of people in this country, maybe even some of you watching this now, who don't have reliable internet or cell phone coverage, don't have either the access, like either the broadband access is not there, such as the case in rural and many tribal lands, or maybe the access is there, but it's just so unaffordable that people don't have it. And so I think that's also something too that I have started doing work on as an organizer and a journalist and someone running a media org, is really trying to fight for digital access and digital rights. I know we're talking about the environment today, but to me, all these things just go hand in hand,
Yeah.
Kima, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think so. I think the social media, the digital information, I think is definitely one of the most effective means of communication at this point. And to be able to use it, for messaging, I think is very, 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 very good and very useful. The other thing that we do is we try to stay close to the issues in terms of staying rooted at the grassroots level, so that we're a part of the community and not just an entity in the community. And we don't come for 8 hours and then leave and go away somewhere, and then that's a job for us. See, what we do at Riddle is a lifestyle. And that means knowing the residents, knowing their ills, knowing what affects us, because what affects my neighbor affects me, right? So if we're still dealing with a community, then we want to stay close enough to those stakeholders in the community that we can always keep a ear to the ground, if you will, about the issues affecting our community, because there are many. and we can't address them all using the same format. Like you say, this conversation is about, environment, but then there's gun violence. There are a lot of other issues that we could advocate for. So we just try to keep our ears very close to the ground and stay rooted in the community. And that we built out a campus called the Riddles campus that people can come to receive information. They can come there and just blow off steam, right? In the midst of a concrete jungle, they could come and experience beautiful greenhouses and fish and just kind of get away. And sometimes that's part of, the advocacy work, is giving people a place to vent so that their frustrations don't come out in a way that's detrimental to society. And so maybe much of advocacy now is listening more than talking now in some aspects. So we try to incorporate that at Riddles, but we definitely use digital and social media as our primary driver to reach out to folks.
Yeah, and also I read that you've expanded more recently with Riddles.
And we're always expanding at Riddles. It never stops, it seems like. So we started in 2009, 2010. Fast forward 10, 11 years later, we started out at 1.3 acres on the Lower East Side of Cleveland. Now we occupy roughly 16 acres of contiguous farm space in that same community. The community that we reside in was once a notorious illegal dumping area because it's sort of isolated off of the main beaten path, if you will. So during the evening hours, folks would dump trash, restaurant, house furniture, anything that an individual didn't want to pay to dump, they would come and dump. Stolen cars, tires, you name it. It was reported early on that there were some trash piles that were almost 12 to 14 feet high of trash and debris. So when we came into that community, we came with the idea we were going to transform that space. So what started out as a forgotten triangle is now the urban agricultural innovation zone, right? So what a transformation. And that alone. So yeah, we've grown quite a bit. We started out with 1 or 2 greenhouses, and now, like I said, we have 6 greenhouses. We have a full EPA certified compost facility. We do ongoing urban agricultural training. We have a full scale aquaponics operation where we farm over 10,000 tilapia fish at any given time. We've just been selected to be the official nursery for the city of Cleveland. So we'll be providing tree stock to the city of Cleveland for its Reforest Cleveland efforts. So that'll be a new thing for us. We have a community kitchen and now a restaurant where we serve fresh farm to table prepared foods a few times a week. We do Taco Tuesday, yay, and we serve our tilapia fish on Friday. So you can literally get a pond from the water to your plate like within 2 or 3 minutes. I've been a practicing vegan for 30 years, so I say it's the best fish I never tasted, right? So, but we still enjoy serving it to the community, and we just like to think that we've created an oasis in the desert, where folks can come and experience a green space, because some of the individuals in our community will never leave their neighborhood. So we have experienced a level of growth over these past 10 years. And we're very thankful and humbled by it. And we just want to keep doing the work.
Yeah, that's awesome. And earlier when you were talking about like letting people vent and kind of letting people be themselves, like what do you notice about people and like how their vibe changes when they come in and see the space? Like what does that look like?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And this is a sweet spot that you hit right there, because here's how it works for us. We realized early on that environment predicts behavior or affects behavior. So the example is, say, if you're hanging out, socially with some friends, maybe in a social environment, you may act one way, but when you go visit grandma, maybe you may act a different way, right? Just as an example, or the way you may converse around your parents may be different than the way you converse around your closest friends. So what we learned earlier, that if we could create an environment in the midst of this forgotten triangle space that brought forth life, energy, wholeness, plants, wellness, hope, and we could grow those things that necessarily don't come out of the ground, then we could start beginning to change people's attitude about their diet, about life skills. Part of the history of Riddle, we started as a exterminating company, right? So now the name makes sense, Riddle. And as part of that journey, we were able to exterminate in public housing. So we got a chance to see how some of the most challenged residents in our community live. And it broke our heart to see what the residents ate, mostly the children, right? They were eating, if they ate at all, maybe nacho cheese Doritos for breakfast or something they got from the mini mart down the street. And it touched us, and we said we had to do something. So that's what's been driving us to commit to this work. And it's just continued to grow for us and expand. And our biggest thing is that if we could take an old rotten apple and turn it into compost that we sell for $35 or $40 a cubic yard, how much more could we do with a life, right? A community resident, somebody that's struggling, somebody that needs help. So we also work with veterans. We have a PTSD program where veterans can come and just kind of release if they're having a tough day. We have counselors on site. We work with youth groups. We work with ex-offenders. We believe that food is a universal conversation, right? And health is a universal conversation. And we believe that at our core, most people want the best. And we believe that if we can provide the best products, the best produce, the best soil, the best education, the best instruction about farming, and make it affordable, then we've done our job at the end of the day. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Sounds like a whole body approach. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, Jen, I wanted to ask a question about intersectionality. So in a society that values conformity and preaches individualism, I find that aspects of identity can be overwhelming to others. And it's like we're allowed to have like one difference or like one distinction. Otherwise, it's just too much for people to accept. So I'm wondering, when it comes to intersectionality, what challenges have you faced around being too much for society? And how does that affect your community? And how do you stay empowered through it?
Ooh, I laugh because I'm like, oh, I'm too much for most people. So I've been told. You know, I guess for me, it's really important that like my identity labels are always used because I belong to so many communities that suffer from erasure. So, when I introduce myself to people, I'm not like, hi, I'm Jen, I'm a bisexual, like that's not how I go about my daily life. But for me, part of why I just make my communities, a big part of my work and prevalence is one, that's my duty, that's my responsibility to my communities and to my people. But also it's a reminder, it's reminding people that you have all kinds of people in your communities. Not everyone is straight, not everyone is cis, not everyone is able-bodied. And something that I forgot to mention in the last question, is language and disability access when we're conveying information. Not everyone can see and hear or speaks the same languages. And that's kind of where intersectionality for me is so important, is that we have to remember how vast and complex and diverse our communities are. Because if we don't do that, then we're leaving people behind. And, we know when you have people who have multiple oppressions, those things start to stack upon one another and they start to just feed off each other. And then we have community members that are suffering so much more. And so that's part of it for me, why I always really try to push the intersectionality out there. I really try to push my identities and who I am. Also, as well, because it would have made a big difference for me as a kid if I had seen Native people being depicted in any kind of positive way. When the TV show Res Dogs came out, like I cried a lot watching that, because I was like, oh my God, something by us for once, you know. So it's that intersectionality piece. We have to always keep that in mind in the work we do, especially around climate and environment. You know, we have to think about who are the people suffering the most. You know, it's indigenous people, Black people, brown people, the global South, people who are poor, disabled people. I've been doing research and writing and reporting on the intersections of indigeneity, disability, and the climate crisis. You know, so that intersectionality, it's key, because we have to remember all of our people. And yeah, there are days where, I mean, I'll be honest, I feel very alienated from a lot of the world, including my own communities sometimes. Like, I get very upset with my tribe and some of the things that they do. You know, I get upset with the disability community. You know, it's tough. It's hard to feel like you're being forgotten sometimes by your own people. That's I think the most painful, you know. Like, I expect the US government to not give a damn about me. You know, like, I expect that. But when it's your own communities, it makes it much more painful. Which I think sometimes is why I'm that much more vocal, is in the hopes that other people won't go through these things in the future, or at the very least people won't feel alone or as alone. I feel like I got a little rambly, so I hope that like kind of answered the question.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I'm curious, like, you know, you mentioned how intersectionality is, it's especially climate and climate change is especially, you know, bad for different marginalized groups. And I was wondering if you could say more about how climate fits into that.
Yeah, so I mean the climate piece, I mean, we can see that in terms of, you know, where are the pipelines? Where are coal mines, uranium mines, all the hard mineral mines? Where is large scale corporate agriculture occurring, as opposed to, you know, smaller, you know, things like what you all are doing in Cleveland at Riddle? Um, you know, you can look at where is it that the vast majority of the ocean's plastic is washing up? Well, it's washing up on the shores of the global South. You know, where are the communities that are being the most directly impacted by droughts or flooding, you know, heat waves? I mean, all kinds of things. You can see that it's always communities that already had the least to begin with that are being hit the hardest. You know, and when we think about, you know, the way that we move forward and the way that we fight for the climate and the environment and for our lives, for all life really, um, we have to keep that in mind, and keep in mind our strategies. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm struggling to find the right wording right now, but our solutions, the solutions that we come up with as we're doing this work, we have to remember all of the different communities and how they're being impacted and what each one really needs, which means talking to the communities themselves, like was mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, how do you know how something's supposed to work in a community if you've never lived there? It seems so obvious. It's like
Yeah.
you don't get the flow, you know? Michelle, I was wondering if you could weigh in. Oh, your hand just.
No, I mean to keep doing like the clap thing, but it's like the hand thing. So, but yes, I would like to
Yeah, please weigh in.
thank Stephanie for putting a great in the chat, you guys. This is being recorded too, so we're able to. And I wanted to thank our interpreters as well for being here. But spending time, again, I feel like it goes back to spending time with people to understand how their lives are being impacted. A lot of my research is focused on the polar regions, the Arctic and the subarctic, and these transition zones between the two climates. And the North Pole has had human history for thousands of years, right before we were here. Like there's some important indigenous knowledge that we have either labeled as, I'm trying to, Jen, I'm having problems finding words too. But can I use an example of seals? Okay, so seals as indigenous food, important food source, seals, salmon. In the, I think it was 80s or 90s, there was a photo that was very, very popular. It was like the baby seal and someone had clubbed it, not to be graphic, and I'm sorry, it was a graphic photo. And that came around in my childhood, and I remember because of how I grew up, it was immediately people got really angry, like, the natives they're savages, like, why are they killing seals? And so it was broadcast across the world as like this, they were savage killers of these baby, cute, adorable seals. Now, not understanding those people's lives is where it all went wrong, because then there were regulations that passed that restricted their access to fishing and feeding their families. They're not getting, they have food shipped, but the food situation is so much different. How they have to, not have to, how they thrive. And then when, it changed. So that's a really, I think, important analogy. The baby seal and your average, not average, your American who hasn't been outside of the state or doesn't have exposure with a lot of other cultures or diversity, doesn't understand that it's not smashing a seal's head for fun. It is a way of life where they are from geographically. Our needs and we vary geographically, humans do, as do our diet needs. But it was there were some regulations passed that restricted their access to fishing. You'll hear the same about whaling. We do need to think about endangered species, we do, but we also need to balance that with the needs of the people and their like rates of suicide and heart issues goes down. We keep coming, keep coming back to time and food and human connection. That's my years of study. That's where I keep going back to. Boy, I get off topic, I'm sorry, baby seals, but they were villainized. The villainizing of a specific segment of peoples who have just as much right to, eat a seal as my neighbor is eating, a steak. Somehow there was not enough communication, and they suffered. They suffered because of the regulations, because Hollywood and the Western culture, popular culture, took it as something that it wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say too, I think that oftentimes when we think of where our food comes from, we don't see it, right? So I live in Old Brooklyn, I live in a food desert, I'm not seeing farms around me. And I think that, so since we can't see where our food is coming from normally, we don't relate food and climate together, even though in what that means for access to food and how we get our food. So no, that was really great. And I think that leads to another question that I had is, this is for everyone. What do you think are the most important issues to advocate for right now and in the future, and why?
I'll vote for environment. Because with all of our various backgrounds, cultures, upbringing, if we don't have a planet right, all bets off. And it's a little weird how that's said, because with the Earth being several billion years old, we always get the feeling that we're trying to save the Earth. And I think the way to frame it is we're trying to save a place for us to stay on the Earth, that the Earth will more than likely be here, even if it goes dormant for another billion years and comes back. But I don't think we have that kind of staying power, right? So this whole idea of maintaining an environment that we can express our differences, our cultures, our lifestyles, our shared experiences. Without an environment, all bets off. So I would say that's one of my top 5.
This is Jen. So I'm gonna go with ending colonialism. And it's very, very large scale. But I think of it as colonialism. There's actually a report just put out by the IPCC saying that colonialism actually caused the climate crisis. Thinking just the example of the baby seals or traditional whaling and such. Indigenous people are not the ones that have led us to having endangered species. We're not the problem. We didn't cause that, you know. So it's for me, it's like it's colonialism. And then when I think of colonialism, that leads to all the other little tendrils of, gender-based violence, the climate, gun violence, all the different issues that our communities are all struggling with. I see them connected to colonialism in some way. So yeah, that's my giant big picture answer.
Really good.
Oh, and I'm just going to share in the chat a link to this article about this IPCC report and ruling that colonialism caused the climate crisis.
To your point, one thing I would add, if I could, you sparked a thought, and it reminded me of this notion of limitation, right? So, I think when we look at the resources that's available on the planet, many of the indigenous communities had an idea that they could fish, but there was a limit to how many they could fish. There was a point that we knew inherently that we couldn't go beyond. And when we look at many commercial industries and how the situation we find ourselves in was a direct result of a lack of law limitation, that we took too much, or we went further and we wanted to take all of it out of the earth, not leave any for, we look at oil and that whole story, we know, right? And how it took billions of years to make X amount of oil. Now we drain it all in 100 years, right? So those type of things. And that was just a part of indigenous culture, that there was laws that allowed us to do things within a certain realm, but not to go beyond that and take and tilt the scale to where now we're facing all of these issues that we are.
Yeah. And Michelle, did you want to add anything?
Of course I do, but I would rather hear from our other panelists.
Okay. Well, moving on to, because I'm a student, so I have a question about student advocacy at Tri-C. And we have like a lot of different programs that encourage student involvement, student success. And what suggestions do you have to further engage and encourage minority or otherwise marginalized groups in these programs at school?
I could jump in. I think part of it is identifying where folks have a particular passion. I think there's a direct correlation between advocacy and passion, that it has to be something that you feel enough about to at least say something to somebody else about it, right? And I think that's where it starts. And with the student population, trying to find a balance between what people care about. The world is changing, and folks' views are changing about a lot of different things. So what are people's sweet spot? the minority and underserved communities have had challenges for many, many years and have found ways to either cope or survive, but still push back, against the machine, if you will. And it continues to be a challenge to this day. And then there's a whole nother segment. Well, as long as it doesn't affect me, it doesn't matter. But it all affects us all, right? Because we're a human family. So what we said earlier, what affects my neighbor affects me. So I think it's really about allowing, because I think school after high school is a chance for young adults to experience life for the first time, maybe some outside of their parents' household, maybe some on a college campus. And it gives you a chance when you might have grown up in a very controlled environment to see a bigger world. And that's going to help shape your worldview, right? About how you see things, how you see people. If you go to a traditional college, you may have a roommate that's not of your same ethnic background. So you get a chance to learn people and learn the value that differences are not necessarily a bad thing, that we can all find a way to agree. And that's why we love to keep bringing the conversation back to a food conversation. And we believe at Riddle, all we see is green, right? That if we could sit down and break bread over a meal, we could discuss anything. Some of our best memories are over the dinner table, but some of our toughest conversations were at the dinner table as well. But we think that's always a great place for convening, and food has been one of the primary mainstays of that. It kind of neutralizes everything because, if we could have a potluck, everybody bring a dish from their own culture and we enjoy and share in that fellowship. And it kind of depressurizes situations in some cases. So I would spin it that way and just add that for thought and for context.
I have on that note, did you see what they did in Akron pre-COVID? They literally took there's this 59 in Akron. It's a road that has like separated communities, like for bad. It was segregating economically, socially. A few years ago, Stephanie, I'm sure you probably heard of this too, because Stephanie's from my hood. They set up a table stretched down the length of this like ridiculously, terribly planned highway and just set up tables for everyone. So it was this beautiful, huge dinner table style meal to bring everybody to this strangely marginal boundary that marginalized at the same time, but brought them together. It was you were talking about bringing people over food, and yes.
I think the other thing that I would add is who's creating the programs or the organizations or the clubs, who's leading them, who's making the decisions about them. If you want more marginalized people involved, marginalized students, then they need to be the one making the decisions, just going back to that whole, we're the expert on our lives, students are the ones who know what they need. And so it's who's making the organizations, the clubs, the programs, the whatever, who's leading them. Yeah. And it's also, I think, faculty as well as the administrative side of the universities needing to take a little bit more of a hands-off approach on what students are able to do. I think that's a really big part of how you're going to get more marginalized people, more marginalized students involved. I think also helping to provide resources that they need. I was really excited when I saw on Twitter that you all have the free groceries and things there. If you're helping people get the things they need, then they can be more involved in their community. If you are not struggling as much every day to keep a roof over your head and food in your stomach and clothes on your back, all those things, then you can get more involved in all of these different fights, whatever that fight is for your community, whatever it is you're interested in, which is part of why I also said colonialism. We got to end that thing, because that also means ending capitalism and all the systems that are keeping us in these silos where it's just us trying to survive rather than all of us working together as a community and building something new that actually works for us as opposed to working for systems of power, you know, like corporations and such.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, for students creating groups that sometimes the bureaucracy of a college is difficult to navigate when you're a student and not faculty or staff. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we could, how's everybody feeling about asking questions in the chat? Does this feel like a good time? Unless anybody else, yeah, I feel like I'm curious to see what other people want to say.
So far, we've just had commentary. So if you, and I'm double checking that I didn't miss anything, but if anyone has questions for all or any of the specific panelists, now is your time. You've had a chance to hear from each of them and have a better sense of their passions and some of the work that they're doing. So I know a lot of times I don't know what question I even want to ask until I feel like I have a little more grounding. So feel free to type them on in there.
Mm-hmm.
Can we speak, or do you want to type?
Yeah, what the heck? Come on in. Speak.
I got a question. All three people that are being interviewed today, what kind of help are you getting from the government and your causes? I know, Ken, I believe you're probably getting city help, but I mean, Jen Deerinwater and Michelle, how are you getting help with what you're trying? Because since I've been in Professor Greer's class, I've learned a lot about like indigenous people, people with disabilities. I have issues towards things like that. But I was wondering, what kind of help are we getting? What strategies are you using to get the government more involved? Or is it even happening with the government? Probably not, correct? Thank you.
This is Jen. I would love to answer this question. I could talk about this one for a long time. Nothing. Nada. That's what the government's doing for me and mine. Not a damn thing. You know, I should say, when I think of my government, I have to think of the US down to my local government, but then I have to think of my tribal government. You know, I am a citizen of two nations, you know. My tribal government is doing some things to help our communities, some that I really agree with, but they're certainly not doing what they could be. There's a lot of stuff like around ableism and anti-queerness that I'm very unhappy with, but I see my tribal government trying to serve at least part of our community. And I see that with tribal governments. Now the US government down to municipal and county, I haven't ever seen them do really much of anything. And even when anything good happens, it's undone in no time. It's either undone through a new policy, through the budget. That's another really big one. You got to watch budgets. I know it's so dull, but it doesn't matter if we have, you know, policy in place if things are not properly funded. That's huge. Watch your budgets. But personally, I've never seen any aspect of US government, federal, state, city, none of it. I've not seen them do anything. You know, on a very personal note, I have been battling with the DC government since 2017. I've been approved by the city government for home health aid services, yet they've never fulfilled all of the hours. I've had horrible problems with like bad aids, bad care, and things. I gave up. Like, I just gave up and said, you know what? I give up. I'm just going to have friends help me because the government isn't going to do anything. Not for me personally and not on the issues that I fight for. And so that is where, and we are seeing this specifically with climate, where direct action is the key. I mean, yeah, keep going at the government and stuff, but make life as hard as you can for them. That's my goal. You know, it's just make their job hard. But I also recognize that part of what's saving us and saving our what's left of our earth and the climate and everything is the people doing direct action. It's the people taking to trees. It's the people chaining themselves to the doors of the banks. It's that. And we're seeing that. And we're seeing that coming out in reports as well. And you can also see that reflected in policy. You know, if people doing frontline work, whatever that is, whether that's BLM or it's, you know, the Atlanta Forest Defenders, whatever that is, you can see the government's response as they come down harder on, you know, community organizers and activists. So I feel like anytime we can see the government coming at us like that means we're doing something good. So for me, it's all about that direct action piece. And I feel like it's also really important to say that you can be a part of direct action without necessarily having to go sit in a tree sit or chain yourself to something. You know, I've done some frontline nonviolent direct action work, but a lot of what I do, I can't, you know, with my disabilities and things, I can't go chain myself to a bulldozer. That's not possible. But there are other things that I do in the background to support that work because there's so many roles to be played, whether it's media or it's just feeding people or it's providing healthcare or whatever it is folks doing direct action need. There is some way for everyone to play a role. And those roles can always change with time as well. And every role is valuable. And I went into that tangent because the government's not going to save us. They created these problems. They're aware of these problems. The system's not broken. It's working exactly how it is intended to work. So for me, we got to tear it all down and we have to build something new as communities. So yeah, that was my make life hard for the government, but don't expect them to save us. We have to save us. We help us, you know.
So I have just if it's okay, does anybody else want to go real quick? Just a quick follow-up. So I am buried in student debt because I was the first one in my family. I came from, you know, as lower middle class, like we had food, I had a good education, but they couldn't afford, and my dad was in prison when I graduated. So I have a lot of debt, and with that being said, like making sure, you know, students, wherever you are in life, have access to better understanding of how it's going to affect you, you know, communication, but the direct action on the topic of direct action against the government, I feel like there are so many, like you said, not particularly subversive is what I was trying to say, measures, but if I can teach 4 people how to can their own food, I feel like that might be part of it. If if you don't aren't able to go to marches, you know, to write letters or, you know, I mean, how many of you on your phone got texts during these election cycles being like, hey, Michelle, this is Tim Ryan. I'm trying to get your vote. Did anybody get those? Like, we got to think on that. Particularly, I'm interested in developing apps. Like I even have time for that. But you know, if it's in your hand, and not everyone has them, but most people have a phone, that is really great, you know, to change, add signatures, you know, collect interest. But that was just my
We do have, and I don't want to skip over Kima. I just wanted to.
No, I think the last 2 speakers did it. They nailed it. So I'm good.
Okay. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Juice. I just, I know that Kim just posted again, so I don't want to overlook her question. So she asked, what are some ways, it just moved, we can start being more green?
Recycling at home is easy, right? You know, that's the real like first level is just separating your plastics and stuff and not trying to send them to the waste stream. Just think about the simple things. We walk 100 miles one step at a time. And often, if a lot of people do small things, it turns into something real big versus one person doing a real big thing to move the needle. And we kind of look at it like that. You know, like our moderator mentioned, or our last speaker, I'm sorry, Michelle, maybe set the phone down and go for a walk, because a lot of these efforts, they start with us as individuals and they spread to our circle of influence, right? So, you see on these emails, be the change you want to be. And you see that quite a bit on some of the emails you see from friends and family. And it really resonates. It makes sense, but take small steps first. People always ask about the vegan diet. And how can I change my diet? How can I become a vegan? And early on in my Azaleas days, it was like everybody had to be a vegan. I want the world to be a vegan. And statistics have shown that is one of the best ways to reduce harmful effects to the environment. But that's a sidebar, right? So as we've grown and learned, we sort of started to change the language to say, just make healthy choices, right? Because to try to force everyone into a certain lifestyle or behavior is not realistic. But if you care about your health and care about the health of the community, possibly we could choose, maybe an apple instead of, Funyuns or whatever, just maybe making a different choice about your health and about lifestyle. So I would throw that in for context.
Yeah, Kim McCord, I echo that. The small things can add up to be really big things. Even I put in the chat, move 1 or 2 days away from meat-based to vegetable-based. If everyone did that, we would save such a gigantic carbon footprint. We would probably lower the amount of methane has now taken center stage. I don't know if you guys saw, but the outcome of a lot of this work, methane is part of our atmospheric composition changes. So yeah, just very small changes that you can do, like getting a water bottle. I'm telling you, if you can think and economically too, 1 water bottle for the semester. And we at Tri-C have those great where you can put your water bottle, like the fountains where you can just fill it up, you just do this and it fills. Saving so much, because they have found there's microplastics have been detected in humans' blood for the first time. So less plastic is the easiest one, I think. Sometimes easy, sometimes
not. So this is Jen. This is where I guess I'm going to be kind of the Debbie Downer and say that as long as wars continue as they are, I think it's really important that it's talked about that the U.S. military is the world's largest polluter. War is very profitable, but it's also very harmful to the earth beyond just the humanitarian issues and such. So I kind of look at it and I'm like, well, yeah, I don't want to encourage people to be mindless in how you go about your day and the things that you do. Don't use more than what you need. Like, make smart choices, but also I think it's really important that we talk about the fact that oil and gas companies use some of the same marketing companies that big tobacco used many years ago when they were trying to fool the public into thinking that tobacco use wasn't bad for your health. Well, oil and gas use those same firms to try to tell us that, our actions of going green each day will make a difference in the world, while they just pollute and take and take. So I don't personally think those small actions are going to make the difference, the crucial difference that we need for the climate, as long as we continue with the U.S. military and all of the things that we have happening. However, with that said, the systems are failing us. the climate crisis is only going to exacerbate that. We are quite likely going to have more pandemics in the future. Things are not looking good for us in this country or the world at large. And that's where I also think that doing things like canning your own food, growing your own food, doing those things are important. One, it gives us a relationship to the earth and to all the living beings around us, which I think a lot of us have been cut off from, and which is part of what's led us to this problem. But also it's going to be important because these are just things we're all going to have to learn how to do eventually. And I also personally kind of like doing some of that stuff because I think it kind of reconnects me with my ancestors, like doing some of the things that they did and knowing that I'm kind of living in a way that they did, pre-white invasion and colonialism. There was something else I was going to say, and I lost myself somewhere along the way. Oh, and also in doing these things like learning to grow our own food and all that stuff, I also want to add that the things that we do as individuals to go green is going to vary. For example, I'm not going to go vegan. That's just not going to happen. That's not the way my ancestors ate. It's not the way I want to eat. I also, because of my health problems, have so many food restrictions that meat and vegetables are about the bulk of what I can really eat anymore. You know, some people may be able to just start going without straws and stuff, but somebody else may need a straw because that's how they have to eat or drink. So I also think those things that we can each individually do are going to be different based on who we are and what's in our communities and what's available to us. But I think it's always ultimately important that we remember that it's the government and the corporations that have done the harm and have tried to lie to us and fool us into thinking that just recycling will be enough to undo what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. It's a simplistic answer and trying to approach when students, in the context of a classroom, I have so much that we cover in one semester that then I need to weigh it out with the good that people are doing, the good that's happening, the small victories that do mean something. So the small victories help, because climate desperation and anxiety over it is a real thing, a real thing. People are, have major issue, me being one of them. So providing some hopefulness. Growing a garden is a hopeful thing. Canning is a hopeful thing. To maintain that hope, I think, is important. And then if you fortify that, then you'll be able to be like, I'm going to be able to attend this rally in DC to where we are going to attempt to. I went in front of the pharmacy board at one point in time in Ohio against them to stand up for something that I thought was they were overreaching. And our little ragtag group was able to do it. Like you're from all over and had different backgrounds, but this one subject brought us all together, and we were able to go against the pharmacy board and the Ohio, and halt some things. But I had some meat. I had a hamburger after a bunch of fries and probably a milkshake.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I didn't mean to, I always try to balance this, like, how do I be really honest with people and give an honest answer based on my knowledge and, my personal upbringing and beliefs in life and stuff, but also try not to depress people. And I will say, I was just having a conversation with a friend earlier today talking about COVID and what's happened just in this country, and I was like, I really feel like if it wasn't for all the free labor that has been done by a wide variety of people, whether by choice or out of absolute necessity, we would be in a much, much worse position than we are in this country right now with COVID, with the amount of deaths, now with this latest Omicron variant, so we can do good in this world as individuals and collectively as, communities. So I don't want to undo that, like people are doing good stuff. Like there are great people doing amazing things. It's just also, I just hate us to get lost in the marketing spin of big oil and gas to go green. That's just all. But also trying to get away from plastic is huge for your own personal health because like Michelle said, microplastics, they're just in our bodies and we don't know what those long-term health effects are going to be.
Just a thought, to wrap that last question up, and this is something that we've struggled with lately here in Cleveland, is at least at the leadership level, we ask ourselves, how do we gauge if we're moving the needle or not, right? If the work that we're doing is having some kind of impact anywhere, and where is that information being gathered? Because in Cleveland, we get a lot of good reputation for Cleveland and a lot of bad. Cuyahoga River catching fire was like the birth of the EPA, right? And some other stories. And, we get, and I'm just using examples here, highest crime, highest birth defects, highest infant mortality, all of these things, we like rank in the top 5 worst in some areas, poverty and some of these other things. So we're doing all of this work, we're recycling, we're going green, we got farms, we got gardens, and then 5 years later, we're still the worst. How do we measure if our work is moving the needle? And I think that's important for us that's on the ground to be able to judge that. But again, what matrix are you judging that against, right? It can't be just a created matrix from those that don't want to see you fail, because you'll never meet that mark. But is it measured by you change one person's life today? If you change the life a day, that's 365 lives in 1 year. And most of us know how hard it is to change behavior, right, in an individual, and the time that it takes to nurture a relationship to cause a person to even consider changing behavior. So we always look at that more deeply lately, is how can we confirm that our work is having a direct impact and that we are in fact moving the needle, and what matrix are we using to measure that against?
I'm going to jump in for just a second. I think you're both leading us into the next question that was in the chat, and I know we're getting short on time, so I'm thinking we can just answer the last 2 if that's okay with everyone here. Okay. So the question that Kara asked is, when things get really challenging or depressing, or you're feeling a little hopeless in the world, what brings you back to a state of positivity so that you continue doing your work? And I think some of what all 3 of you were just addressing ties into that, but I just wanted to make sure that question gets asked to see if there's anything that you would add.
I go to the farm.
Really quick, could I just add, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Like, what do you do for self-care? That was one of the questions I had also. So sorry.
For me, nature is the best medicine, to get outside and get some fresh air and to touch the living soil, in the spiritual vernacular, the word for the first man, Adam, and the same word is for earth. So the same minerals that comprise the soil are the same minerals that are in man. So I like to take my shoes off and walk outside and ground, right? And just be in nature. That's the biggest therapy for me, because living in square houses and synthetic environments and internet all around your head every day and your phone ringing and Wi-Fi, it gets to be much. But if you could escape and get away in a green space where you're getting good oxygen, trees, just the beauty of nature, hear a bird, chirp or whatnot, that works for me and most of the folks that I'm around.
So this is Jen. I mean, I'm not always happy and positive and hopeful. Honestly, I find myself becoming less and less of those things with age. Um, so I think it's one, it's we don't have to always be happy and positive all the time. Like, I think that's okay. There are going to be times when we're depressed or we're angry, and it's totally righteous and it's justified. So I think that's important to remember. Um, and then self-care, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. Like, I haven't found a different term that I like, but I don't know. I find the term and the concept of self-care to be sort of it's really sort of based in privilege. Like, if you have the time and the resources for self-care, then you know, I kind of have to question, you know, are you the person that I'm typically going to be like, are you taking care of yourself? With that said, though, there are things I think we can all do. Um, I love to be outside as much as I can. That's not always possible. Um, so some of the things that I do is I've just instituted tech-free time because I have to. I mean, my feeds are all news and all kinds of pretty upsetting stuff on a pretty regular basis. So I just have to have tech-free time. Um, you know, I've given myself, and I will say I am at a point in my life where I can do this. I am privileged enough to be able to do this now, but I'm able to say I don't work in these hours. I don't work before this time. I don't work after this time. I make occasional exceptions, but this is my time. Um, you know, and sometimes it's for me as somebody who's chronically ill, like I don't ever feel good. Like, I have horrible chronic pain. Every day I feel bad. But also learning to listen to my body and not try to like push through the pain, but be like, you know what? I'm just gonna go sit and watch some TV for an hour. Like, I'm gonna go lay down. I'm gonna sit and meditate. I was so resistant to meditation for so long because I just, in my mind, it was like, oh, that's like what rich white people do. And I finally got around to, I was like, all right, I'm gonna start this. Everyone keeps pushing it on me. It's made a huge difference for me. I mean, massive difference in like my own dealing of my PTSD, you know, my own anxiety around the state of the world, the stress of doing community organizing, because, you know, it is a lot, your phone ringing and all that stuff all the time. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that I do. But also I look to my community for help. I've gotten better. I will say with age, I'm getting better about going to my friends and my people and be like, look, I need help. You know, here's where I'm at and here's some of the help I need. And that's been huge for me. And then, you know, in turn, we turn around and give that back when our others in our lives and communities need that. And I've babbled long enough. I'll stop now.
Thought that was actually really insightful, not babbling even remotely. And Michelle, I'm interjecting again because I'm again kind of branching off of what Jen just said in setting parameters, right? For when we that the session is going to end at 2:30, so that means we have 6 minutes left. So I'd love for Michelle, for you to have an answer or time to answer that question. And I saw that Dave November did respond to that last question that was focused on what students can do. So hopefully you are that is useful. So Michelle.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to tell Victoria too, I'm going to organize our class at the end of the semester to go do a cleanup along one of the rivers or the lake shores. And then you can choose how to put yourself into that community if you want to. But is this a self-care question? Yeah, self-care. Oh, self-care. So I have a very hard time saying no. I have a very hard time saying no. And that is what it's difficult to because you feel like you're letting someone down. You know, how can I let this person down? But then again, I've got to be able to sleep and function and live hopefully a little bit more to see my son into more adulthood. But chronic stress will eat you up. But I dance. I go find somewhere to dance. I dance. I hang out with the ones I love. With COVID, I felt like my soul was shriveling because you couldn't go to no dancing, no hugging. For a creature like me, that's very difficult. But good food and good dancing and being able to actually say no. Like my students will tell you that I answer their emails or their texts like all day, 7 days a week. But sometimes they know that I cannot get back to them immediately. So, and it's not lowering your expectations. It's just making some softer boundaries for yourself. But yeah, I'm a trained dancer outside of this, so I go dance. And work in the garden too.
We have just a few minutes left. Did any of the panelists, would you like to say anything in closing?
Thank you guys for inviting us to this platform. Dave November, he's a good friend of mine. Thank you, Dave, for inviting us. It's been a pleasure to speak with you guys. I feel not just as a panelist, but as a listener, I'm enriched. I take a bit of each of you with me on my journey forward. And we just thank you for your experience and all that you do. Let's keep working together, even though we don't see each other. But I believe if we keep doing good, our work meets somewhere, maybe in the ether, right? But it meets somewhere. And it's the only force that we have to push back the evil and the negative and the hate, that we got to keep doing this work in wherever place we find ourselves at, because our works connect. They connect with folks in the rainforest, they connect with folks in the Amazon, they connect in all throughout Africa and Asia and India and China. They all connect if we keep doing good. And we're the only force pushing back right now against hate and evil and injustice. And that's what drives us every day, as they wake up and keep doing the work, because if we don't do it, there's no force that's opposing that, and it'll just run rampant. So thank you.
I agree with all of that in Wado, which is thank you in Cherokee, for having me here and for this talk. It was really wonderful, and I'm very honored that I got to be a part of it with you all.
Yes, I also am honored as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all of you. It's been fantastic. I really felt like I learned a lot as well. And I'd like to also thank Juice for moderating today. She did a fantastic job for keeping those questions moving and allowing all of these insights to come through. So thank you all again for speaking, and thanks to all of our participants for listening and hopefully learning something new. Have a wonderful day. Go enjoy the sunshine today, wherever you might
Thank
be.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Dave.
Great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Juicy rocked.